What would you do if a complete stranger started screaming at you over something that didn't even make sense? Would you argue back? Try to reason with them? Or just sit there, trapped, wondering how your peaceful day had spiraled into chaos? I had barely parked when the trouble started. The lot was nearly empty, the kind of wide-open space that felt like a rare luxury, especially on a weekend. No circling around for a spot, no aggressive honking, no rush, just a quiet moment to myself before I went inside to grab a coffee. I let out a deep breath, savoring the unexpected peace. But then, out of nowhere, a voice sliced through the stillness like a siren. "You can't park there." At first, I wasn't even sure she was talking to me. My brain was still processing the silence that had just been shattered. I glanced around, expecting to see someone else caught in the crosshairs of that shrill accusation. But no, she was looking directly at me, standing behind my car with her arms crossed, her entire stance radiating fury. I frowned, checking the lot again. There were no signs, no markings, nothing indicating this was a reserved space. Just asphalt and empty spots stretching in every direction. I turned back to her, rolling down my window slightly. "I'm sorry." Her expression darkened. I said, "You can't park here." The way she said it wasn't a suggestion, it was an order, her voice rising with indignation, as if I had just committed some grave offense. For a brief second, I wondered if I had actually done something wrong. Maybe this was private property, or maybe I had missed some obscure parking rule. But no, there was nothing to justify this level of hostility. Then she took a step closer, slapping her hand against my car window with enough force to make me flinch. "This is private property," she snapped, her voice dripping with authority. "And I can have your car towed in minutes." That's when I knew, this wasn't about rules. This was about control. I stayed in my seat, gripping the steering wheel a little tighter as I stared at the woman through the window. Her words lingered in the air, heavy with entitlement. "I can have your car towed in minutes." The sheer confidence in her voice was almost laughable. Almost. I took a slow breath, trying to keep my frustration from bubbling over. "Is there a sign somewhere?" I asked, keeping my voice as even as possible. I didn't see anything saying this lot was restricted. Her eyes narrowed, her expression hardening as if I had just personally insulted her. "You people always act like you don't know the rules," she sneered. "This lot is private property, and I don't have to explain myself to you." "You people." That choice of words didn't sit right with me. My stomach tightened, but I refused to let her rattle me. Instead, I glanced around again, double-checking for any sign, any indication that I had made a mistake. Nothing. The only thing unusual about this lot was the angry woman standing in it, acting as if she owned the place. I exhaled slowly. "Look, I'm not trying to start anything. If this is a private lot, I'll move. But I don't see any signs, and I really don't think." Bang! I jumped as she slammed her hand against my window again, harder this time. My heart kicked up a notch, but I kept my face neutral. I wasn't about to let her know she was getting under my skin. "You don't think," she spat, leaning in so close I could see the way her nostrils flared with every breath. "That's exactly the problem. People like you think you can just do whatever you want. Park wherever you want. Disrespect whoever you want." I felt my jaw tighten. This wasn't just about a parking space to her, it was about power, about dominance, about making sure I understood that she was in charge here. And I wasn't about to play into that. Then, before I could react, she stormed off. For a split second, I thought that maybe, just maybe, she had decided to let it go. But no. She didn't leave. Instead, she walked straight toward a row of shopping carts, gripping the handle of one and shoving it directly behind my car. I blinked. What the hell? She didn't stop at one. She grabbed another. And another. One by one, she pushed them against the back of my car, effectively trapping me in place. My pulse spiked. I threw open my door, stepping out before she could block me in entirely. "Are you serious right now?" She turned toward me, her smirk widening as she placed her hands on her hips. "Oh, you want to leave now?" she taunted. "Too bad. Should have listened to me the first time." A slow, simmering anger burned in my chest. I had dealt with difficult people before, but this was a new level of petty. I moved toward the carts, reaching for the handle of one to push it aside, but before I could, she stepped directly in front of me, blocking my way. "Aha," she said, shaking her head. "You're not going anywhere until I say so." I stared at her in disbelief. This had gone from ridiculous to absolutely insane. I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could, the low rumble of an approaching engine caught my attention. A large SUV rolled into the lot, pulling into a space just a few spots away. The driver's side door swung open, and a man, tall, broad-shouldered, and completely indifferent to the chaos unfolding, stepped out. And just like that, everything changed. Karen's smug expression faltered the second the SUV pulled in. She turned her head sharply, eyes narrowing as the driver, a man who looked like he had just stepped out for a casual coffee run, climbed out of his car and shut the door behind him without a care in the world. He didn't glance in our direction, didn't acknowledge the growing tension in the air. It was as if our ridiculous standoff didn't even exist. I saw something shift in Karen's face. That fire she had been stoking, the absolute certainty in her righteousness, wavered for just a second. Then, as if snapping back to reality, she squared her shoulders and marched toward him. I barely had time to process what was happening before she threw herself into a full-blown confrontation with this complete stranger. "Oh, so you think you can just park here too?" she snapped, her voice sharp and biting. "Do you even care about the rules? Or are you just as entitled as he is?" The man, who I now realized had the kind of calm, unbothered demeanor of someone who had absolutely no time for nonsense, paused mid-step. He turned his head toward her slowly, blinking like he was only just now registering that she was talking to him. "What?" His tone was so casual, so profoundly unimpressed, that for a split second, even Karen seemed thrown off. She recovered quickly, jabbing a finger toward his car. "This is private property. You can't park here." He glanced at the half-empty lot, then at me, then at the shopping carts she had used to physically barricade my car. And then, with an almost exaggerated slowness, he turned back to Karen. "Lady, I'm just here for a coffee." I watched as Karen's face twisted, her mouth opening and closing like she couldn't believe she was being ignored. "That's not the point," she shrieked, her voice climbing into that unbearable pitch again. "You can't just do whatever you want. You people are the reason this place is going downhill." There it was again. You people. My stomach clenched. Derek, because, by now, I was starting to get a sense of who this guy was, tilted his head slightly, eyeing her like she was some kind of malfunctioning robot. "Yeah," he said slowly, "I don't care." And then he turned and walked straight past her. Karen's jaw practically unhinged. She let out a choked sound, like she had just been personally insulted in the most offensive way possible. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides as she whirled back toward me, as if somehow I was to blame for this blatant act of disrespect. I braced myself, ready for whatever fresh insanity she was about to unleash, but instead, she did something that actually made my stomach drop. She reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. "I'm done playing games," she announced, voice dripping with manufactured authority. "If you two won't respect the rules, then I'll make sure someone with actual power handles this." And then, before I could stop her, she dialed a number and put the phone to her ear. "Yes, hello? I need security in the parking lot immediately." My breath caught. She wasn't just calling security. She was lying. "There are two men out here harassing me," she continued, voice shaking with fake distress. They're being aggressive, they're refusing to leave, and I feel unsafe. A cold wave of disbelief crashed over me. Was this really happening? I shot a glance at Derek, expecting to see some kind of reaction, but he just stood there with the same detached expression, hands in his pockets like he was watching a particularly boring episode of a show he had no interest in. "Oh, for God's sake," he muttered under his breath. Karen turned away from us, still talking into the phone, layering on the performance. "I don't know what they're capable of," she said, voice breaking ever so slightly. "Please send someone quickly." She ended the call and whipped back around, smiling. It wasn't just a smug smile. It was the kind of smile people wear when they think they've won. You gentlemen might want to start thinking about what you're going to say when security gets here. Derek let out a sharp laugh, shaking his head. "You really don't have anything better to do, huh?" Karen's expression tightened. "I take rules seriously. And people like you," she jabbed a finger at both of us, "need to learn that you can't just do whatever you want." I clenched my teeth. My hands curled into fists at my sides. Because I knew exactly how this looked. I knew that security showing up wouldn't just see some deranged woman throwing a tantrum over parking. They'd see me and Derek. And she was counting on that. For the first time since this insanity started, I felt real anger crawl up my spine. I had been patient. I had been reasonable. But now? Now, Karen was playing dirty. The tension in the air was thick enough to choke on. Karen stood there, arms crossed, a smug look plastered across her face as she basked in her perceived victory. She had done it. She had escalated a minor disagreement into a full-blown confrontation that now involved security, and she was reveling in it. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to take a deep breath. She was lying. I knew it. Derek knew it. And deep down, I had to believe that when security arrived, they'd see through the act. But then, just as I was convincing myself to stay calm, she did something that made my blood run cold. She turned, took a step toward my car, and in one swift, deliberate motion, dragged her nails across the driver's side door. The sickening scrape of metal on metal sent a shockwave through me. I felt my pulse skyrocket. My hands clenched into fists so tight my nails dug into my palms. She had just scratched my damn car. Derek let out a sharp whistle. "Wow. You just went full psycho, huh?" Karen didn't even blink. She just shrugged, looking at me like she had done me a favor. "Maybe you shouldn't park where you're not wanted." A hot, seething frustration crawled up my throat. My muscles coiled as I fought against every instinct telling me to snap. She wanted a reaction. She wanted me to yell, to lose my temper so that when security arrived, they'd see exactly what she wanted them to see, a man who was out of control. I exhaled slowly, biting back the words that burned in my chest. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction. But before I could even process my next move, a voice rang out from behind me. "I swear, every time I come here, there's some idiot making a scene." Karen and I both turned at the same time. The security guard had arrived. He was a middle-aged man with a tired expression, the kind of look worn by someone who had dealt with far too many people like Karen in his lifetime. His name tag read, Officer Grant. Karen immediately shifted gears. Her face twisted into a mask of pure distress. "Officer. Oh, thank God you're here." I had never seen someone go from self-righteous fury to helpless victim so fast in my life. She placed a trembling hand on her chest, her breathing suddenly uneven. "These two men have been harassing me, blocking my way, refusing to leave, and now they're getting aggressive." I let out a short, bitter laugh. Unbelievable. Officer Grant looked between the three of us, his eyes narrowing slightly. "All right, slow down. What exactly is going on here?" Karen turned to me, her voice dripping with manufactured fear. She pointed at me, has been refusing to move his car, yelling at me, and getting in my face. And this one, she jabbed a finger at Derek, thinks it's funny to encourage him. Derek snorted. Lady, I barely care enough to be involved. Officer Grant sighed, rubbing his temple. He turned to me. Your side of things? I took a steadying breath, keeping my voice as calm as possible. I parked here. She started yelling that I couldn't. There are no signs, no restrictions. She escalated it, blocked me in with shopping carts, called security with a fake report, and then, I turned slightly, gesturing toward my car, she deliberately scratched my car. Officer Grant's gaze flicked toward the fresh scrape on my door. His brows furrowed slightly. Now he was paying attention. Karen let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. That's a ridiculous accusation. Why would I ever do something like that? Because you're insane, Derek muttered under his breath. Karen's head snapped toward him, fire flaring back in her eyes. Excuse me? Derek just rolled his eyes. Oh, please. You're acting like you didn't just go full meltdown 5 minutes ago. Karen was unraveling. She had expected security to show up, hear her side, and immediately side with her. She hadn't planned on me staying calm. She hadn't planned on Derek being completely unfazed by her theatrics. And she definitely hadn't planned for what happened next. A voice called out from a few feet away. Hey lady, you're going viral. Karen froze. I turned, my stomach doing a flip as I spotted a bystander standing near the entrance of the coffee shop, holding up his phone. Recording. A slow grin spread across his face. I got the whole thing. Wanna wave to your new audience? Karen's face drained of color. For the first time since this started, I saw genuine panic flash across her face. Her mouth opened and closed, like she was scrambling for a way to claw back control. Then she snapped toward the guy, her voice shrieking. Delete that. You can't record me. The guy just shrugged. Tell that to the internet. Derek let out a low whistle. Oof. That's gonna be rough for you. Karen's breathing turned sharp and uneven. She turned back to Officer Grant, desperate now. You need to make him delete it. This is harassment. Officer Grant just stared at her, completely unimpressed. Yeah, that's not how that works. Karen let out a sound somewhere between a growl and a strangled scream. And then, without another word, she spun on her heel and stomped away. I watched her go, still half in shock. The same woman who had spent the last 20 minutes making my life miserable had just been completely and utterly defeated. The moment she disappeared into the coffee shop, Derek let out a long breath and clapped me on the shoulder. Well. That was exhausting. I let out a short laugh, rubbing a hand over my face. You're telling me. The guy with the phone grinned. I'm giving this one the title, Karen Goes Nuclear Over Parking Spot. Derek nodded. Solid choice. Officer Grant shook his head, muttering something about needing a raise before turning and walking back toward the main entrance. And just like that, it was over. Derek stretched his arms over his head, glancing at me. So. You still getting coffee? I exhaled, shaking my head in disbelief. Yeah, I think I've earned it. As we walked toward the coffee shop, I felt the weight of the last half hour finally lift off my shoulders. Karen had come in swinging, determined to control the situation, to control me. But in the end, she had lost. As I stepped into the coffee shop, the lingering tension from the parking lot finally began to fade. The warmth of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, a stark contrast to the cold hostility I had just endured. I let out a slow breath, rolling my shoulders as I moved toward the counter. Derek followed behind, his expression still one of mild amusement, as if the entire ordeal had been nothing more than an unexpected form of entertainment. Karen was nowhere in sight. Maybe she had gone to sulk in a corner, or maybe she was already planning her next self-righteous crusade. Either way, it didn't matter. She had lost, and she knew it. No screaming, no tantrum, no desperate call to security had been able to save her from the moment she realized she had been recorded. The look on her face when she understood her meltdown would live forever on the internet? Priceless. Derek chuckled as we reached the counter. I almost feel bad for her. Almost. I smirked. She dug her own grave. The barista, who had clearly seen everything from behind the counter, gave me a knowing look as she handed me my drink. You handled that way better than most people would have. I nodded, taking a sip of my coffee. Figured there was no point in fighting fire with fire. Still, as much as I had kept my cool, I couldn't shake the fact that people like Karen existed everywhere. People who thrived on control, who made up rules just to feel important, who pushed others into conflict simply because they could. It wasn't about the parking spot. It never had been. It was about power. And when she lost that, when nobody gave her the authority she craved, she collapsed under her own weight. Derek clapped me on the shoulder. Well, that was probably the most entertaining thing that's gonna happen all day. You should probably check online later, your new best friend might be famous by the end of the night. I laughed, shaking my head. Wouldn't be surprised. As we left the coffee shop, I stole one last glance at the parking lot. The same empty space where it had all begun. A ridiculous, unnecessary war fought over something so insignificant. But in the end, I had done nothing wrong. I hadn't backed down, and I hadn't let her walk all over me. Karen had come in swinging, convinced she could control the world around her. But today, she learned the hard way that she couldn't. So, have you ever dealt with a Karen who took things way too far? What's the wildest encounter you've had? Share your stories below. I'm willing to bet someone out there has one even worse than mine.